Welcome to the section in which we are going to talk about the costing for accessories and packing material. Earlier we have talked about the costing of a shirt, and then we talked about the micro detailing of how the costing of bleaching is done for a particular fabric. So now we're going to talk about costing for accessories and packing material. So when we're looking at materials costing, which is slide number 19, the first thing that we have to do is look at the approved sample style. If a buyer wants you to make a product in a particular material, the buyer will give you the standard or the cutting of the fabric, or they'll give you an approved sample. So first thing is look at the approved sample style, and from the sample, from the garment, to determine what specific products will be used and the required number of units per garment. So when you look at a garment, you can see what fabrics are required. You can see the buttons and if there are zippers or main label, size label, care label. So everything is there in the product itself. So in terms of the materials, you look at the product and determine what specific products are required and how much. So fabric would be in terms of meters, and buttons would be in terms of number of pieces, or something like a stitching thread would be in terms of meters, and if you look at the labels and things like that, it's going to be in terms of number of pieces. And the most important part of materials costing as well as fabric costing is this aspect of percent of utilization. This is very, very important, and a merchandiser should know that how much is the percent utilization of a particular type of material. If I were to elaborate this a little, when you're buying fabric, if you need 100 meters of finished fabric, you will require at least 17% more of the same fabric in gray form. So when you buy 117 meters of gray fabric, you send it across for processing, there's going to be a lot of shrinkage and wastage and other things. And from 117 meters of gray fabric, you will get only 100 meters of finished fabric, because that is the process. Now, different types of fabrics, we experience different percentages of wastages. And therefore, when you are ordering a fabric, you should know how much extra fabric has to be bought, how much extra gray fabric has to be bought, so that you will order accordingly. And if you do not know the percent utilization with a high level of accuracy, it is going to lead to poor utilization. And this poor utilization is going to lead to waste, and waste is something that we do not want at all. Now, so simply put, percentage utilization is the ratio between how much material is actually consumed compared to the amount that becomes a part of the final product. So if you order 10 meters of fabric, you will actually see that 9 meters of the fabric has been used in making of the shirt. Let's say 4 shirts have been made using 9 meters. There is 1 meter which is left over, which has some defects, and for some reason or the other, and leftover and things like that. So if 9 meters have been used out of 10 meters, so the percentage utilization is 90%, meaning to say that out of 10 meters, 9 meters have been used and 1 meter is leftover. Normally, in case of fabric in garment manufacturing, 80 to 85% fabric utilization is considered very good. So most people use percentage of cost of each material to cover the waste. Now this statement means that whatever fabric you order, more or less, the cost of that material will have to be covered from the money that you're charging to the buyer. So if a product can be made using 100 meters, if a shipment can be made using 100 meters, and if you use 110 meters, all of the money that will be required for 110 meters, that will have to be covered from the total payment that you are getting from the buyer. So it is always advisable to buy correctly so that you have the least amount of wastage. The wastage cannot be zero, but then it can be minimized, because the buyer is only going to pay you for the correct number of pieces. The buyer is not going to pay for your waste. Other costs like measuring and inspecting fabrics are treated as an activity cost, or included in the total cost of the product. Now imagine someone who is measuring the fabric. Vendor says, I have sent you 1025 meters of fabric. You receive it, and then you ask one of your person to measure it. Upon measuring, we find that it is not 1025 meters, it is only 1010 meters. So your vendor has quoted 15 meters more. So only after measuring you find out that the actual fabric that you received is 15 meters less. Now what about the person who measured it? Because this person also has to be paid a salary. So someone who is measuring the fabric, someone who is inspecting the fabric, there's a cost involved to that. And such costs are treated as activity cost, and these costs also will have to be included in the total cost of the product. If you go to slide number 21, we talk about the materials and trim cost. Now there are some items such as lining. Lining is the fabric which is used inside of the garment. So what is visible on the outside is the main fabric, and what is inside, if there are two fabrics, let's say two layers, so the layer which is visible outside is a shell, and what is inside is called the lining. So some items such as lining, labels, price stickers, pocket fabric, the fabric with which you make the pocket bags, and elastic, these might show very little variance in cost. So the variation in the cost in case of lining and label stickers, etc., pocketing, etc., the variation is very less. But in case of zippers or closures like hook and eye, or a D, or a button and threads, in these cases the variation in the cost is slightly higher. And the minimum quantities and lead times also influence the cost. Now, minimum quantities is, if you go to a vendor and say that I want 10 buttons of a particular type, the vendor is simply going to say no to you. The vendor says, to produce one button or to produce 1 lakh buttons, I will have to make a die. From the die, I'll be able to make the buttons. And the cost of the die is about 10,000 rupees. So why would I make a die for a button whose order is only 10 pieces? Now there are other vendors who might say that fine, if you want one button, I'll make one button for you, but you'll have to pay for it. So if you buy 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 buttons, the cost of the button may be 10 paise, or maybe less. But if you buy 100, 200 buttons, then the cost of the button would go to somewhere around 10 to 11 rupees, because the cost of making the die for your particular style of button will be charged to you. So the minimum quantities and the lead times. Lead time is the amount of time which the vendor will take to deliver the goods to you. And if you ask the vendor that leave everything and you just do this order for me and make it immediately, then the vendor will say that if I leave everything and I do everything only for you, then the cost is going to be higher. So if the minimum quantities and lead times are higher, the cost is going to be less. But if the quantities you are giving or the time that you are giving is very less, then the cost is going to be high, for obvious reasons. Go to slide number 22, and here I have just provided you a suggestive list. It's not a comprehensive list. The list can be very, very long. This is just to give you a fair idea of the cost of various raw materials and accessories. So something like a wash care label comes for about 50 paise. Elastic quarter inch would be like about 5 rupees a meter. It can be between 3 to 5 meters, 3 to 5 rupees per meter. Main label, because it is main label is the brand label, and if you're doing a main label for someone like a Victoria Beckham, the price of one label could be 50 rupees, or maybe more. But the normal labels, the ones we do for Mango, Zara, H&M, etc. Normally it is well within 1 to 5 rupees. Size label is very cheap, very small. 25 paise per piece is more than enough. Sometimes as less as 10 paise. Stitching thread is about 4 to 6 rupees per reel. One reel about 400 meters. Buttons can vary from 10 paisa per piece to can go to 25, 30, 40 rupees per piece, depending on, let's say there is Swarovski, encrusted button. So in those cases, one Swarovski is about 2 rupees. So if there are 10 Swarovski on one button, then so it's going to be like 20 rupees only for the Swarovski and then for the button. So buttons, the price would vary a lot. And then polybags, normally it would come between 1 to 2 rupees. If it has a lot of printing and other things, then it might go to more, about 4 rupees or 5 rupees. But 5 rupees is on the higher side. Carton is normally a good carton, 60-40-40, which is 60 centimeter by 40 centimeter by 40 centimeter. In that case, the standard rate right now is about 50 rupees, about 5-ply carton. 5-ply means 5 layers of paper, and one layer is plain, the other second layer is, let's say, corrugated, third is again plain, fourth is corrugated, fifth is again plain. So that's how the cartons are made. So 50 rupees is a standard, 60-40-40 if you see. Hang tag is the paper tag that you have. Again, these can be very, very fancy, and the prices could be upwards of 25-30 rupees also. But normally the price tickets, the hang tag that we have for Mango, Zara, etc., it is well within 3 to 10 rupees. And price ticket is it's a small paper tag on which the price or the barcode sticker is stuck. So this price ticket is pretty cheap, about 50 paisa to 1 rupee 50 paisa. 1 rupee 50 paisa is on the very higher side. 50 paisa is normally, or maybe even lesser, 30-35 paise is the going rate right now for price ticket. The zippers are like metal zippers, nylon zippers. Nylon zippers are going to be cheaper. Metal zippers are going to be more expensive. And zippers for a jacket is going to be 35, 40, 50 rupees. And zipper for a denim pant is going to be less because the size of the zipper is very less. But for the size of an entire jacket, front open jacket, is going to be very high because the length of the zipper is very high. And then there is something called a carton sticker also. Sticker which signifies some notation. It could be a sticker, color of a sticker can be used for a particular country. So for H&M, when we are sending shipments, so a blue sticker is for France, let's say, orange sticker is for Germany. So that sticker is stuck on the carton. So even from a distance, if you look at the carton, you would know this carton is for Germany. Something like that. So carton stickers are about 25 to 50 paise per piece. Sometimes the vendors, they do a color, a printout within their company itself. So that would come out a little cheaper. So this is the cost of various raw materials and accessories. And then we come to a very important part, which is stages of costing. Now, the stages of costing is, what happens is that, when a buyer sends a sketch to you and asks for a cost, you do the costing. But from the sketch, you just have a very vague understanding of what this garment is all about. And the moment you get the sketch, the buyer says, I need the costing in, let's say, in 1 day's time. And there are 20 such sketches sent by the buyer to you. Now, 20 sketches, you have to do the costing and you have to give the quotations by next day. You don't have the luxury of making the garments or making the patterns and then figure out what is the amount of fabric that will be required and accessories and things like that. So at this point of time, we do a very aggregate or a rough costing. And because we have to give the quotation immediately. So we keep a lot of buffer. And then we send the costing to the buyer. So we have sent the costing. Now, after a week's time, the buyer comes back and says that, out of the 20 sketches, these are the 3 sketches, 3 styles for which I need you to make the samples and again give me revise the costing. So now you have a little bit of time. You make the patterns for these 3 garments, make the garment. By now, you have a clear and a more accurate understanding of how much material will be required because you've actually made the garment. Now you can do a more accurate costing and then give the quotation to the buyer. Now, after you've given the quotation to the buyer is now going to negotiate with you and then try to pull down the prices a little, and you would also try to fight with the buyer. That's what happens in negotiation, and you reach a stage where you reach a price which is okay to you and it's also okay for the buyer. That is the point of time when the price has been finalized between you and the buyer, and now the buyer will give you the order. Once the buyer gives you the order, then you start ordering the fabric, ordering the materials and things like that. At this point of time, you have started buying the fabric, you started making a lot of other samples, the fit sample, the size set, the pre-production sample and so many things. Now you have far more clarity in terms of how much money would be required, how much material would be required. So that is another stage of costing, the third stage. The fourth stage of costing is where the shipment has been made, how many garments have been rejected, how many garments you were finally able to ship. So now you can see how much of overtime has been done, how much labor cost, how much finishing cost, washing cost, how much detergent was used, how much electricity was used. You have all the tiny details, all the expenses which have been incurred towards making of this shipment and delivering it. This is the last stage of costing where you actually know how much money you have actually spent and how many pieces were you able to send to the buyer. The number of pieces that you send to the buyer will pay you only for those number of pieces. So now you can clearly see how much money you are going to get from the buyer and how much money you have spent on this particular order. That is the last stage of costing. That is the actual costing. So if you come to slide number 24, the stages of costing, the name nomenclature is: first stage is pre-costing, second is costing done prior to production, third is costing done during production, and fourth is post-production costing. That's what we talked about, the pre-costing or preliminary costing. Now, this is used in early product development stage where the order is not clear, you haven't got the order, and the designers are still sending you sketches, and you are trying to figure out and then doing the costing. So, are designer sketches producible or marketable within the established price range? This is the stage where the brand has sent you the sketches, and the brand asks you that you give us the prices, and you as a manufacturer or as an exporter, you might tell the buyer that the kind of sketches, let's out of the 20 sketches, there are 5 sketches which are not producible, will not be able to produce because they are not very practical, or they're going to be very expensive, and whatever it's going to go out of your price range. So the buyer may remove those styles from the consideration set. Now, rough estimates based on estimate of material, labor, or cost of previously produced similar style. So what we do, we refer to based on our experience, or we refer to all those similar styles that we have done in the past. So we refer to that, and then we look at the sketch, and then we try to figure out, and then we sit down and do the costing. So this is going to be rough costing, and you are going to of course have a lot of buffer to safeguard yourself. And so this act of referring to the previous style, it helps to weed out costly styles before additional time and resources are invested. So when you go through the process, and when you have done this preliminary costing, and some of the costs are very high, it is helpful in removing all those styles at the sketch stage itself, the first stage itself. You haven't even made the garments, We've already removed some of the styles because you know that this is not, you know, this is not producible. This is not practical because the prices may go beyond the price range of the buyer. So why waste time on that? If you go to slide number 26, yeah. So today there are many softwares, you know, which assist in calculating preliminary cost as well as production cost. So imagine it's an Excel sheet kind of thing. You just have to input the details of the sketch in terms of, you know, the front length and the hem and the back length, and if it has a sleeve, what is the sleeve length, and things like that. Just put in the details and it will give you the cost. And that cost you can send it across to your buyer. So, for example, there is a sourcing simulator. It says the simulator. It's a software. It can calculate the cost for you, and you obviously will have to say tell the software how much margin you want to keep. So based on that, it is going to give you the quotations. There are times when, you know, some buyers are very finicky and they give very small quantities. So it's more like a headache. So in those cases, you keep high margins. The more headache, you should keep more margin. If the margins are less and if the order quantities are high, then you have to keep the margins less. So you have to input the detail in terms of how much margin or how much profit are you going to keep. And accordingly, the sourcing simulator will give you the prices. Now, if you talk about the second stage, cost is done prior to production. It then first styles for which the farmer has received the order. So you've given the quotation, done the negotiation, got the order. So once you've got the order, then again you have to do the costing. Now costing is now based on figures derived from approved prototypes. So you've got the order, you have already sent the samples and then sent the quotations, done the negotiation. Now you have the samples in front of you along with the patterns, and you have already negotiated. The prices have been fixed, have been frozen, have been agreed upon. Now you can do the costing based on figures derived from approved prototypes. Whatever samples you've made, which have been approved by the buyer, now you have the patterns in place. Now you can do accurate costing. And you can also identify any of the costs that you might have missed during, you know, doing the costing. Imagine you just have a sketch in front of you and you've done the costing. The chances are you might miss out on something or the other. But when you've actually made the samples and got it approved, now there could be some of the cost you might have missed. Now you can see all of that, you know, in terms of logistics, in terms of tariff costs, etc. There are very many minute costs that you might forget. So now is the time when you identify all of them, and then and then you the production that the costing that you're going to do before the production, this is going to be far more accurate. So now you will be based on the costing that you are doing now. This will be the basis for establishing production budgets. So if you have taken the cost of stitching as 25 rupees, you're not going to give 25 rupees to the production people. You're going to give somewhere around 17-18 rupees. 7 rupees is still going to be a surplus. So based on your second costing, which is happening just before the production, that will be the basis for establishing production budgets. How much labor are you going to pay? How much for buttoning? How much for fusing? How much for washing and finishing and other things? And based on the specific production methods for each operation, including machine type, stitch per inch, workplace layout, standard allowed minutes, and material handling methods, depending on all these things, you will be able to figure out how much money you are going to, or how much budget you are going to allocate for each of the activities required to produce the garment. And then we have the third stage, which is the costing done during production. Now, this is determined by using actual data from production. So actual production is happening, actual fabric cutting is being done, actual wastages are happening in front of you. So now you are so well set. Now you can actually see you're getting actual data. Now the costing that you will do is going to be accurate and it's going to be actual. Expensive, you have to monitor the expenses, and of course you have to cross check with the production people that how much is the labor rate now, how much production is happening, and on a daily basis. Based on that, you can see if there is a lot of wastages, a lot of rejection in the fabric, it's going to increase the fabric cost. And if the labor says no, we are not going to make it for 17 rupees, we'll have to give at least 19 rupees because it is taking more time. It is not as simple as it looks. The operations are more complex. The buyer is saying no, I want straight line. They are being very strict about some things. Labor says we will not be able to do it in so less money. So in that case, the production cost will increase. This is the costing done during production. And the fourth level is where the shipment has been sent. Actual costs, actual expenses are there in front of you. Now you can actually see how much money did you actually make in this particular order. So with that, we come to the end of this particular section. Next, we will be talking about the costs. So we talked about cost and price. Cost is the total amount of money required to produce a product, and price is the amount of money asked or received in exchange for a product. And what is the profit? Profit is the price minus cost. Now there are direct costs and there are indirect costs. Fairly simple in economics. Direct costs are comprised of direct material, direct labor, direct expenses. Direct material, all such material which you can see in the product is direct material. Any material which is not visible, let's say a men's shirt. So anything which is not visible in the men's shirt, but without that material you cannot do the manufacturing of the shirt. Those are indirect materials. So you want diesel, you want oil, oiling of the machinery, you want some things which are required while stitching of the garment, and then once you stitch the garment, you remove those materials. Those are indirect materials. Direct labor are wages cost of those employees who actually manufacture the finished product. So people who are there in cutting, in stitching, in washing, finishing, those are direct labor. But someone who is measuring the fabric, who is checking the fabric, their efforts are not visible in the shirt. You cannot see whether it has been checked or not. You can see that, yeah, it has been stitched, it has been washed. So it has been stitched, it has been washed, it has been finished, it has been ironed. These are all direct labor. But all those helpers who are there on the floor, who are doing all types of activities without which the shirt cannot be made. People who inspected it, people who checked the washing, who checked the stitching, who checked the embroidery. Those are all indirect labor. And then we have direct and indirect expenses. Now, direct expenses is without which a specific product could not be made. Indirect expenses are like people like guard, administration people, people who are into maintenance of the machinery, housekeeping, people who do the cleaning and clean the toilets and things like that. I mean, they are not required in the stitching of the garment, but without which the factory cannot run. You can't have dirty factory, you cannot have unclean toilets and things like that. So those expenses towards so the expenses like on diesel and maintenance and things like that, these are indirect expenses, but they are mandatory, without which you cannot run the factory. So we have direct costs, and all the direct costs like direct material, direct labor and direct expenses, they form the prime cost. And if you go to the 32nd slide, we have the indirect cost. The indirect cost, we talked about all of that. Indirect material used in factory which do not form a part of the finished product. So the diesel, oil and things like that which are required, diesel is required for the boiler. Oil is required for oiling of the machines. These are not part of the shirt. These are indirect materials. Indirect labor like people like the helper, supervisor, the guard, merchandiser, designer. These are all indirect labor. Indirect expenses, all expenses like stationery or cleaning costs and things like that. These are all indirect expenses. So the indirect costs, they form the factory overheads. We had taken overheads as 10% in the second slide, the second slide in which we had looked at the costing of a men's shirt. So we had taken overheads as 10%. Now it can be 10%, it can be 7%, it can be 20%, 25, 30, 35%. But how do you calculate the overheads? So the overheads are all the indirect cost, which is indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses. Now, if we look at another aspect of cost, it can be seen also in terms of fixed and variable cost. Now, fixed costs are such costs which do not change with the output of business. Meaning to say that whether you make 100 shirts or 1000 shirts, fixed costs remain the same. So fixed cost is something like a rent of the factory. So if you make 10 pieces or you make 1000 pieces, the rent is going to remain the same. Now, variable costs are costs which vary with the output of business. So, stitching cost is a variable cost. You make 10 pieces, the costs are going to be different. If you make 100 pieces, the cost is going to be different because you have to pay more to the labor because you made more number of pieces. Fabric cost is again variable cost because if you make 10 shirts, the cost is going to be something else. If you make 100 shirts, obviously the cost for fabric is going to be increased because you made more number of pieces. So, that is in simple terms, fixed cost is what does not change with the output, daily output, and variable cost is what changes with the daily output. And semi-variable costs are, it contains elements of both fixed and variable. So something like, if you look at the electricity bill of a factory, so if you are in an industrial area, you have to have your own transformer. Now, if you have a transformer, you have to pay at least 10,000 rupees per month, even if you don't use a single unit of electricity. When you start using the electricity bill is going to increase. So if you are producing 1000 shirts, you get a bill of 15,000 rupees. If you make 2000 shirts, you get a bill of 20,000 rupees. Now each month, 10,000 is the fixed cost of the electricity, and the variable cost of the electricity is based on the number of pieces that you are making. The more number of pieces you make, the more amount of time you are using the machine, and the machines are running on electricity. So when you talk about electricity, it is a semi-variable cost because it has a fixed cost as well as a variable cost.